Hello there. You are listening to KPCALP, Petaluma, California, 103.3 FM. You are here with DG the 30-something for my show State of the Union. And my charge here is to talk about issues that affect both the nation and then also how that affects the local government situation, communities, all that good stuff. And I wanted to talk a little bit about, because I've gotten a lot of questions about the agency and the radio station that I'm here with. And so the radio station is brought to you by Petaluma Community Access, who is a nonprofit 501c3 out of Petaluma. And we are here to provide media services. So we are a member-based nonprofit, and we work to, and I'm on the board, so I got the pitch down. And so we are here to provide media services, and I've said time and time again that I think that in order to maintain our democracy, we need these outlets for people to express themselves, especially at the local level. So we're providing a voice for the community to express themselves, whether it's through music, whether it's through talk, whatever kind of show that you're looking to produce. So you can come in, and if you are a community member, you can come in, you can become a member, you can be in this seat. Or we have this whole equipment rental. We have a whole lot that you can do. So please look us up. Come on in, stop by during our business hours, and you can become a member, or you can become a friend of and give a donation. We love those. And so I do want to just give the pitch that without community support, this agency cannot continue without the community support. And I'm talking about monetary support, so as well as just general community support. So please, if you can, consider donating to the agency. Any amount helps, keeps our staff running, it keeps the studio running right here, and keeps the agency running. So, and our staff work very hard. So please consider that when you are. So now let's get to what my show is going to be about. So my show today is going to be on housing and Airbnb. I will have a guest for the second half to talk to us a little bit more about Airbnb and the perspective of why it's favorable for cities. But in preparing for the show, I've talked a lot about housing. I think, a lot of people know that there's a housing issue all over the Bay Area, and that I don't think it's anywhere in the country someone making minimum wage can afford a one-bedroom apartment. So we know that it's a local issue and it's a national issue. I wanted to go back to a show I did on student loans because it is predicted that student loans will be prohibitive to buying houses for the millennial generation. So I think that's between the ages of 24, 25 to 36, 37. And especially the younger millennials because of the student loan debt. So I wanted to go back to that and give some background on that because I think, and that's my prediction, is that not only is the next crash going to be due to student loan debt versus the housing crash, but that it's going to keep people my age from buying homes. So I'm actually going to start there, and then I'm going to get into the background of Airbnb and how that works and all that kind of stuff. So let me share this video over really quick. And you can ask questions on my Facebook page. I don't have my email up right now, but I'm more than happy to answer questions after the show via email. You can get me at DOMAYNE@MABERME.com. So if you have questions, again, I don't have my email up in front of me, but you can also ask questions within this video if you are watching on Facebook. But as I said, if you have any questions after the fact or you just want to talk to me, you can email me. I'm a very accessible person, so I want to make sure that not only am I speaking to the community, but I'm a big part of the community. So please reach out. Or if you want to learn how to become a member, you can also reach out. And I have a lot of people that ask me about that. So I'm going to start by giving some statistics. And this is from the federal government education department where these statistics came from. So in 2017, there was $1.49 trillion in student loan debt in the country. That's 7.6% of the total GDP. So we're not talking about a small amount of money. And there's 20 million students in college, and then 60% of those take loans, and so that's at all levels. And payments are, so one of the rules about payments, your monthly payments after you've completed, although I had loans that accrued interest while I was in school, and they encouraged us to at least pay the interest off, which is really interesting because when you're in school full time, the suggestion is to then work. And I did work when I was in my undergrad, but in an accelerated master's program, it wasn't an option for me to work. So I'm not exactly sure where they thought that money was going to come from. And I know some people that did pay off the interest while they were in grad school, but you obviously have to have that money to come from somewhere. And so, and with, I think the interest rates for my loans were 6.5 and 7.5%. And the higher interest rate is the one that accrued interest while I was in school. So just for an idea, my car is financed at 1.2%. My current student loan after consolidation is at 7% interest rate. So for most people, their student loans accruing interest faster than they can pay. So, and the reason being is that the payments by law or by requirement, you can always pay more, are to be no more than 10% of your disposable income. So that's the highest threshold that can be required by lenders. And so you can see that would, I think my loan's accruing, I don't like looking at it, but I think it's accruing $600 a month, just about. And so, but 10% of my disposable income is not $600 a month. I wish it was, that'd be cool, but it's not. And so you can start to see how even the requirements and the interest accrual is pretty insane. So there are different repayment plans, but again, even the repayment plans aren't paying off faster than the accrual. And there is, of course, some forgiveness programs, but the point, that I'm trying to make. I actually calculated it out for myself. At my 7% interest rate, my standard payment, if I wanted it to be paid off in 10 years, would be $1,100. And so that would be a net salary of $132,000 a year. So again, that would be amazing if I could afford that, but especially living in Sonoma County, that is not a wage, first off, that you see too many people making. And, it's just so expensive to live. I mean, $1,100 rent, and that's still not even enough for a one bedroom in most places. Not in Petaluma, for sure. So, but the whole point, again, of bringing this up is with the housing, and part of the housing crisis is not only the lack of supply, but it's the inability for the certain age group that would traditionally be trying to live that American dream that used to exist. They would be trying to buy homes right about now. I'm 32, and this would probably be a time that in another life I was trying to buy a home, but that's something that's inaccessible when I have, a student loan payment that in theory would be $1,100. Or I'm not paying that, so it's not going to be paid off in 10 years. So therefore, I am stuck for 25 years of payments. I mean, that is almost, you get a 30-year loan for your house. So how do you juggle those two things, is paying your student loan payment and then your 30-year mortgage, however, 20, 30 years, whatever you're looking at. And then further, I mean, how do you find a down payment, and again, I get it. You can save, you can do all these things, and those are important things, but there's just so many considerations. And I think that when we talk later with the person that I'm going to be interviewing, his name's Jeff, some things I think will come up about the home ownership with relation to Airbnb. But so these are considerations by both sides of the argument, and I'll get a little bit more into that. So if you don't know, I keep mentioning Airbnb. I think many people know what it is. I'd say a majority of people know what Airbnb is. So basically, Airbnb is a way to book short-term rentals. It's used internationally as well as domestically. One of the biggest things for me, it made, and I think it's kind of one of their goals overall, is that it is making travel more accessible to people, because they don't have to pay hotel rates to stay. And again, I'm going to get a little bit more into the conversation of the positives and the negatives of it. But so it's a mobile app. Airbnb has its issues as startups, and I'm not going to get into that. But in short, that's basically what it is. They've now expanded to experiences. You can book lodging and experiences, and they're expanding kind of what you can book. But it's really the biggest thing for me, the difference between staying in an Airbnb and staying in a hotel is that you're more immersed into the community itself. So San Francisco is one of the best examples because most of the hotels are located in a central area, so around the downtown area, and there is a radius, and of course there's hotels on Lombard, there's hotels other places, but with Airbnb you could potentially rent a room in a house, or you can rent a unit in a house that is in one of the neighborhoods, and you walk out the front door and you're in that neighborhood. You're not in downtown San Francisco. And I would say there's a lot of international travelers that use Airbnb that way. And then local, I use Airbnb when I'm in the state, or when I'm out of the state. I haven't used it internationally yet, but that will soon happen, I'm sure. So that's what Airbnb is. And Petaluma actually has an ordinance about Airbnb, if you did not know that. So in 2016, an ordinance was passed that allowed for short-term rentals. They're, AKA using Airbnb. Now, there are other short-term rental, ways to get, like VRBO is another short-term rental. But the rules are a little bit different. So that ordinance was passed. It was renewed in December, or it was renewed in 2018. So that is going to continue again until it needs to be reviewed again. So the same ordinance has been re-upped. So, but there's some issues with compliance with it. And that's, I'm reading an article from the Press Democrat. It was written by, I'm probably going to butcher the last name, but Hannah Busang, maybe. And she did a really great job of doing an overview of what Airbnb and short-term rentals look like in Petaluma. So I'm going to be using her information here because, like I said, it was a really great, robust article. So I didn't feel like I needed to go way out to talk about it locally. So, but some of the problems is that when this was first written, so initially, I think it was the first year, they have people that go online and they look at all the short-term rental websites and count how many short-term rentals there are in order to gauge these numbers. And so at this time, there was 130 active vacation rental listings in mid-November, but there was only 25 permits on file. So the city of Petaluma requires a permit. How much? It's like $350 a year, I think. Oh, I get into the numbers later. Yeah, it's $350 a year for new rentals, and then the renewal is $125. And then they require that you have a business permit, which is $49, which is standard in Petaluma because if you're running any sort of business out of your home, you have to have a business permit as well. So that makes sense to me. I used to run my business out of my home, so I went through that whole process. But so, and then the next time, since November, there are 118 non-permitted property owners, and they're saying as of since January 1st of 2018, the short-term rentals have jumped to 136%. So they are continuing to grow, as you can see, very quickly. And it's interesting because you have these statistics, but then there's a quote saying that the enforcement has been very successful. I wouldn't call that successful enforcement, but just me. So, like I said, the Petaluma rules took in effect in January of 2016, and it was renewed. So, and then they do actually, well, and part of what it is they have to get the rental permit, and then they have to remit 10% of their revenues to the city in the form of lodging taxes. So this was a huge thing about I think it's called the daybed tax that hotels have to pay, which is incredibly high. And so I think that was kind of the where they were able to come to a negotiation. So again, it says for the first 2 years, they were largely ignored, these requirements. And so lo and behold, we bring in a contractor. So there's this company called Host Compliance. Apparently they work with a lot of communities. I'm sure they do different type of host compliance, but that's really interesting. Talk about finding your niche. So, and each week they monitor 50 vacation rental websites. I didn't know there were 50, but apparently there's 50 vacation rental websites that they monitor and see how many short-term rentals. So again, this isn't only Airbnb. I would venture to guess that there are several Airbnb properties, or they're on 2 different websites. So, they did start notifying and finding people for not having the permit, which is really easy to do because, again, you're on there, but it doesn't state your address in a lot of the listings. So I'm not exactly sure how they went about that, but there's city record of all the properties, so I'm sure they can figure it out. So, again, the renewal costs are $350, and things keep increasing, and the business requirement. So if the fees were paid, one of the requirements is that if you're renting the entire house, you can't have someone in a short-term rental for more than 30 days. And so basically the projection is that on average, the short-term rentals are 90 days a year. And that would, if people were paying the fees, there would be $162,000 annually that would be made. And so I think that's just in permits, because since the program started, Petaluma has accrued a total of just about $96,000 in lodging taxes and $27,000 in permit fees. So I'm assuming that would be a lot higher if people were paying the permit fees and doing local. So let's see. And so it says 80% are complying. So where are we at? Okay. So, and it just gets back into what I've talked about before. The median household income in Petaluma is $800,000. And so, that whole housing crisis of how do people afford a house at $800,000 when they can't afford it, or if they have student loans, like I said. So 71%, this was really interesting to me. So 71% of the short-term rentals are the entire home, and the remainder use a portion of the dwelling. And so, as I said, if you're renting that entire home, you can't do the short-term rental for more than 30 days. And that was interesting to me, because it does start to go into the fact that it is taking housing off the long-term rental market, in theory. But again, we'll get a little bit more into that because I want to make sure that I have the expert on the phone to answer to it. So, as of last month, and this was in July of 2018, in Sonoma County, so I wanted to branch it out to Sonoma County. She talks about Sonoma County. So there was 2,100 short-term rentals that were known to exist, and about 1,400 were permitted. And so, again, the rules, and then it just talks about how unincorporated Sonoma County is included in that. And so the county had 50 reports of complaints, but Petaluma had 0 complaints since the program started. I saw that in another article. I do believe it says it in this article too. And in addition, that's not in this article, but if you go to the city of Petaluma, it has like a little spreadsheet about what's permitted and what's not permitted. So there is a parking requirement. Like I said, there was no complaints in Petaluma. Of course, you have to pay the income on your income tax through 1099, like you're a consultant. And so that's basically, in short, what Petaluma is working with. It is different in every single city and county, and it's more contentious in certain cities and counties. I know San Francisco has been a very interesting fight, and there's been a lot of conversation about the fact that when Airbnb was first starting to get a lot of momentum, that there was a lot of advocacy that the company invested in, which has since then wavered a little bit because the city, I don't know what the reasoning is. Maybe they had to start funneling their resources into other places. But it's interesting because the city started really pushing back, and Airbnb had a very bad failed marketing campaign they did before not the last election, but the election that was voting about the Airbnb proposition and or ordinance. And so I don't think that helped because that advocacy kind of platform was very, very poorly thought out. And I think it basically called out public officials. And I don't even know what the rationale was. It was basically saying that, money should go somewhere else, but not here, but it was in very poor form. And so I'm not sure if that's exactly the point. That was quite a while ago. So I know that the advocacy went on quite a bit after that, but I don't know what happened then, as if it just lost legs. Like I said, they kind of just stopped that side of what they were doing. I don't know, I have no idea, but I know that I know several people that Airbnb out their properties, and I know that that's been a question, is what happened to all of our support from the company itself, because of course the company is making a good amount of money off of all these rentals as well. So, where does the assistance come in? Now, the company does do a lot if there is damages, and I can ask about that because I don't know off the top of my head. I'm not an expert in this. I just use Airbnb. I don't run Airbnbs. But, so, again, before I take the phone call, just going full circle with regard to the housing and the relationship with Airbnb, as I think it's pretty clear to see that one of the main arguments is that it is taking housing off the long-term rental market. That's the main argument I hear these days. Originally, the main argument was about taking business away from hotels, which was a little silly because people that want to stay in hotels are going to stay in hotels, and people that want to stay in Airbnbs are going to stay in Airbnbs. But given this housing crisis, the pricing, the fires, there is this whole debate about whether it should be, and I know it's at the Petaluma level for sure. I've heard a lot of talk about it, but it's just this idea is, do we permit, people are going to do it, first off. They're going to do it either way. So, that's an important thing. I guess the city could spend $7,000, whatever it was. How much was it? Let me see if it was $7,000 a year, which I guess is not a lot, but I don't think they're doing a lot. They're basically just counting short-term rentals. So they can spend $7,000 a year to then find people. That would be a cost-benefit analysis that would have to be done. I would hope that they are able to bridge that gap by the citations, but the idea would be that we don't need to offset a consultant, is that money would go to the city. But I'll get to that later. So, but again, you can see how the argument as it goes, and it's become stronger of a position after the fires, and now I think it's going to become even stronger of a position with the fires that just happened in Paradise, is that and for me, it's how do we accommodate tourism, which especially in Petaluma is one of our claims to fame. We call ourselves the gateway to the wine country, and it tends to be more inexpensive than staying in Sonoma or staying in Napa, and so that's why it's called the gateway. So we're the gateway right here. So how do we balance tourism, which is generally who's using vacation rentals as tourism, or your family in town, and making sure that residents have adequate housing. And I think it's obviously housing is a very multifaceted, complex issue. This isn't we get rid of Airbnb, it's going to solve our housing problem, or we increase short-term rentals and it's going to increase our tourism, so yada, 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 our economy. So all these things stimulate the economy, and especially tourism. That is, like I said, one of Petaluma's claim to fame. And I think that that's kind of where the issue hits a head in the city, is that we don't want to take that away, even though it causes a lot of headaches in town, not just a housing issue. It's kind of just a density issue and getting around and, you know, just having people everywhere in downtown Petaluma, because we have such, and that's the other thing too that I like to point out, is that in Petaluma we have a huge shortage of hotel space. We can't accommodate currently all the visitors that want to come. There's not a whole lot of property to build in, which I guess would be desirable for a hotel to be in, unless you're on the outskirts of town. And parking is a huge issue. There was supposed to be a hotel that was put in downtown Petaluma, but there had to be this remediation because there used to be a gas station there, and the parking had to be, basically there was nowhere the parking could be but underground, and so that has been halted, if it's even happening anymore. I don't think it's even happening anymore. I'm not quite sure. Someone can correct me on that, but so that hotel didn't go through, and I think the parking would have been a huge issue because right next door is the Theater Square garage, but that's pretty much impacted. So if you try to park there, you know, on a Friday night, especially on the weekends, because there's the theater there, there's restaurants there. If you try to go to that district on the weekends, that garage is impacted and the street parking is impacted, and you're not supposed to be parking overnight. So we have a limited amount of hotel space for sure. There's only one hotel downtown. There might be some bed and breakfasts. I know there's Airbnbs near downtown. So, and that's kind of an argument for it with regard to tourism. And now that they have expanded, Airbnb has expanded to these things they're calling experiences. The Airbnb host can connect you with different things, which again, this is a huge economy stimulator, and since we live in a poor city of Petaluma, there would be a pretty significant argument for being able to stimulate the economy and bring more money into the city, which the permits do. But again, you know, one of the arguments I just heard is that, well, homeowners have to pay property tax, they have to pay, you know, utilities and all these other things, like not utilities, but they have to pay for like garbage and water that goes to the city. You know, isn't that enough? You know, to say that they don't have to do the permits for Airbnb. That was one of the arguments, is, well, aren't they already paying enough for their property that they shouldn't have to then pay for a permit? And I'm sure that's probably what's going through some people's heads that don't have the permits to have an Airbnb in their house. But, or I guess there's also the option that they don't know that there is a permitting process in Petaluma. I think that that's less likely, because if you're kind of in tune with what's going on in the city and you are using an Airbnb property, you would know, in theory, what's going on. And then I think there's plenty of people that don't want the, you know, I don't know. I know if you have a home-based business, I actually don't think the address is published, but there's a certain amount that is public information. So there's probably plenty of people. I mean, Airbnb shields your address for a reason until you book the property. But I'm sure there's plenty of people that just don't want to go through the permitting process because they don't want the city to know, or they don't want people to know if they're specifically doing it, especially if it is just a room in a house. And I do think it does open up people to scrutiny, because this whole argument about, well, why are you Airbnb-ing when you could rent the room out to a long-term rental? And there's not really an easy answer to that. And so any second, about 45 seconds, my caller's going to come chime in here. His name's Jeff Beck. I called him the Airbnb guru. He can talk about this for hours, and we have before. So I wanted to have someone on here that knows a lot about it, and that I can ask questions kind of talking about these different issues that I have talked about so far. So we'll give him the 50 seconds because I don't want to start on a new 15 seconds. I don't want to start on a new topic and then have the call come in. So just bear with me for 5 more seconds. He's on time. Be on time, Jeff. And so there is kind of a game I have to play just to warn people that are watching on Facebook. I have to turn off my microphone in order to hear, in order for you guys to hear on the video. On the radio, you'll hear everything accordingly. So just so you know, and if I get questions and whatnot, I'm going to have to wait until, hold on, let me see if I have any questions so far. This is always, I don't have someone in the studio with me anymore, so I'm always trying to play this balancing act. Okay, here we are. Hello. Hi, how are you? So give me 1 sec. Okay. So I am going to have you introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself personally.
No problem.
Go ahead.
I'm Jeff. I'm actually from the North Bay area, born and raised around here. Happen to also be a recent homeowner and also an Airbnb, I guess, aficionado at this point.
Alrighty. So do you want to start by telling just a little bit about your experience with Airbnb and kind of where you stand on the issue and kind of where you foresee it going in the future?
Well, I would like to point out that initially, as we've seen with many of the sharing economies, that the technology has evolved faster than the actual laws, and that has definitely been something that I recognize as an issue. But me and myself is that it's very difficult to live and afford to live in the Bay Area, and therefore, with that type of nature, trying to get creative on how to make ends meet has kind of brought me in connection with Airbnb, as well as any of the short-term rental groups, which allows me to actually rent parts or all of my space, depending if I'm home or not around, for short-term rental, which has been a bit of a contention over the last recent years as we dealt with a very bad housing crisis and other things in the Bay Area where more or less I've had to get a little bit villainized for basically profiting off of the lack of homes and lack of hotels in the area.
Well, and so what would kind of be your counter argument to, I've talked a lot about the housing shortage. How do you foresee that Airbnb could potentially help that issue, or is it just hurting that issue? And I don't know, how do you feel about that affecting the housing crisis?
I actually do see it from both sides. I've been a resident of San Francisco for a number of years, and I've been a resident of Marin County and other areas for a number of years as well. Now, while I'd love to just say that everything is kind of a lack of planning on the city's part and kind of a lot of, I guess you could call it, NIMBYism of not wanting to add additional development, housing, or even in some cases in Marin, low-income housing. I do feel that while Airbnb has been great for helping me and some of our other friends stay in our homes because of raising both rents and just prices in the Bay Area, I would actually like to see a little bit more of kind of a moderate regulation of the short-term rentals. However, I feel that we've experienced a little bit of a rubber band effect where it was a free-for-all. People were buying and then just simply taking homes off the market, renting them for, basically all the time so that those who are long-term renters or residents wouldn't be able. So I'm kind of in the middle. I see both sides. I really wish that there was better housing available for people, but at the same time, you could say that I'm taking a little bit advantage of the opportunity, which is that there is no place for people to stay and there's no place for people to basically rent. So I'm more or less offering part of my residence as a place for people to stay. But I know that has been very contentious with taking away units from people who actually work and live in the area. So I'd like to see some sort of compromise between the two. But right now I see extremes between the two.
Well, and you kind of mentioned about being able to keep people in their houses. So I'm wondering if you just wanted to expand. I mean, I know that's intuitive, but if you wanted to expand a little bit on what that could look like for home ownership or, kind of helping address the cost of living.
Sure. One of the things I definitely see here, especially for people, and I've actually helped a number of friends stay in their homes because of raising rent or because that it was just so expensive to afford their place, that they've had to figure out a way in order to basically, get that extra little bit that helps make living in the Bay Area something that's, attainable, which is very difficult. And having somebody that even comes in for a few days a month, or even someone who wants to rent out more a few days a week, gives them, let's say, that extra couple $100 a week, or maybe even an extra $1,000 a month, allows them to continue to live in an area which is super prohibitive to anybody making underneath 6 figures a month. So I see the good and bad. And I'd love to be able to kind of participate in, obviously, these conversations and others where we figure out a kind of middle ground between those who are just buying and renting out everything in your neighborhood, which I'm actually in Tahoe right now, which has a very bad epidemic of that, to something that allows people who own their homes can share their homes without being vilified as people who are, basically taking away homes from people who live in the community. Because if you own your home, I'm not sure that you're really taking it away as much as you're utilizing it to basically what the market plays out. So you could say it's a capitalistic adventure. While it's not the most, best for the community at hand, technically you're being, all, I guess, American. You are taking the thing you own in order to make a better living for you and your family.
Well, and I think one of the other arguments to that point is that there are people that are doing short-term rentals that are not interested and were never interested in long-term rental spaces. And so we kind of skipped over the hotel issue because I think, I did talk a lot about the lack of access to hotels here in Petaluma, but it is different in San Francisco. There is quite a bit of access. And I know the hotels were very much against Airbnb in the beginning. So I know it's not as much of an issue, but maybe you want to talk about how that was an issue before.
So yes, while San Francisco does have many more places in which to stay, the same thing applies there, is that because of prohibitive zoning and limits on buildings, there's really only about basically something in the nature about half of the people are serviced by hotels. So that's where you get all of these short-term rentals coming in. But in Petaluma, where it is a huge market that has continued to grow, there's no way that these little hotels can actually accommodate all the people who want to visit, the beautiful and awesome places that are in Petaluma. And one of the things that allows people to actually get there and not have to spend an arm and a leg to stay in places like Napa and so forth is the ability to rent out someone's residence while they're not there, or someone's residence while they are there, because a lot of people actually are totally fine with sharing a spot with somebody else, helping them out with the prohibitive cost of living in the area and helping the person who wants to visit with actually visiting a place in which they couldn't go to because all of the nearby hotels and whatnot are either A, sold out, B, extremely expensive.
Yeah, I talked a little bit about that, as how I see Airbnb being a gateway for travel and people being able to experience different areas that they likely would not have been or not as often. So one of my spots is Santa Barbara, and I couldn't go there very often because the hotel prices were just insane. But now that Airbnb is in existence, I can go. So one of the other arguments is twofold. And in my experience, this is a rarity. Just like in Petaluma, we haven't had any complaints. But one of the main arguments is that we don't want strangers going in and out of our neighbors and that they cause disturbances. And I don't know if you know Airbnb-wide what the occurrence of that is, but, how would you kind of answer or encourage people to consider it when they're saying, well, I don't want someone to come in and throw a big party and ruin my neighborhood?
Absolutely. And I do believe that that is, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it, I believe that that is a problem. And I believe that Airbnb has suffered from the same things as many of the other kind of revolutionary on-demand service companies have suffered from, is that they came up with an idea that so shifted the paradigm here is that they exploded. And immediately it kind of ran out of control. They lost a little bit of the kind of the rules and regulations that kept things in a more, I guess, civil manner. The thing is that I would like to see some sort of basically kind of how San Francisco has done it, but probably a little less extremes, is that everybody needs to be registered. Everybody is notified in the neighborhood of these places, and that if there are issues, that those can be addressed through an official channel and therefore addressed to the person who obviously is running the Airbnb. The problem at the moment seems to be that there is no regulation, and a lot of groups, and I feel a lot of cities are against even considering talking about this problem or solution to the problem. And that is a big problem because you have people that basically just want to banish everything from, let's say, Airbnb to Uber to everything else. The problem is that that stuff's not going to go away because you want to ban it. It's going to cause future complications. I think that the better way to do it is to benefit the community from the taxes or fees or whatever that's collected from the Airbnbs, but also serve a stern warning to those who simply want to profit off your community. If you run in a place where you're just renting out to Joe Schmo who's going to run a party and you don't, take caution in the people that you actually rent out to, I'm not sure that you should be really allowed to do that because your responsibility is kind of like let's say a bar owner who doesn't care about all of the drunk and other sort of drivers that are leaving his bar, keeps on, kind of skirting the law and everything. That type of person, just like any other business, should be either, punished or shut down. But the folks that are trying to make ends meet, try and get a little extra in their pocket, trying to make it by holidays and so forth as we are in right now, I don't feel that those people are the same people that people are vilifying. And I feel that they should be given a chance to show that they're responsible people of the community, but they're trying to provide a very, very in-demand service, but being at the same time cautious of who they're actually putting their place out to. And I can say in personal experience, not that anybody has to believe me, but my 5 years doing multiple Airbnbs all over, and I've had a less than 1% issue with my guests. Most are simply a financial dispute. A couple are ones where I've had to basically call Airbnb or others to say this person is being outlandish or basically drunk, etc., and I've had them removed. So I feel that responsible homeowners, responsible Airbnb people, those are people who should be on the side of the folks who want to put in regulation. They shouldn't blanket the entire, community of people who are trying to short-term or long-term rent as being destructors of their community, because they're not. However, they are lumped in with those who are.
Well, and I think that one of the points, too, for me is that a long-term renter could throw a party, too, or they can destroy your house over a whole lot of time, over years, or they can have pets in there when they're not supposed to, and there's all these arguments, and we're not going to go about and say that all renters are bad, so it's kind of the same idea as that not all Airbnbers are bad, not all renters are bad, but I have heard plenty of stories of houses being ruined by renters as well. So, and then do you want to talk a little bit about the repercussions of someone, you said that you had to call about a couple times or about someone, but what is kind of the repercussions? So if I Airbnb'd out my entire house and they threw a big party and ruined a bunch of stuff, what kind of support does Airbnb provide, and how do you go through that process?
Well, one of the things I do happen to like, and this has been a big shift, and I do want to emphasize big as being that Airbnb has taken it from a very free-for-all. Now, the fact that Airbnb made this such a big thing has kind of exacerbated the initial problem. But the problem has been with things like VRBO, Craigslist, Liftkey, etc. They stayed out of it. They didn't want to be involved. They didn't want to deal with it. It's your problem. It's your, community's issue. They take their cut. They leave. Airbnb is probably one of the first groups that actually has a lot of actual strict regulations that the person who's renting and the person who's hosting has to follow. Obviously, things like racial discrimination, etc. Airbnb has been very adamant about kicking people off who try and do that type of stuff. When people are basically renting out places that are not permitted by the city, etc., Airbnb has also stepped in to remove listings and do things that VRBO, Flipkey, Craigslist, etc., would never do because they aren't in any way connected. But when Airbnb started coming out and they changed the game entirely for short-term and long-term rentals, people all of a sudden took notice. There was this company making billions of dollars off of these short-term rentals. Not like VRBO and the rest who were, using this as kind of like, hey, list it on us. It's your deal. You deal with it. Problems happen. That's on you. Airbnb has tried to step in. In fact, I've had many times in which I've called them and said, I have a guest that is very irate, is disagreeing on stuff, etc. And Airbnb has requested that they leave or has refunded me money in terms of repairs for, like, let's say, damaged carpet, dirtied up walls, broken stuff in, like, let's say, the bathroom, etc. So it's the first rental kind of service company, because they're really just a service, that basically steps in and is in the intermediary where you show that someone came into your house, ruined something in the community, and you present them something with, this is the cost to fix this or repair this, and Airbnb issues you both the payment as well as deals with the person who caused the issue in the first place. And I personally have had 5 people blacklisted from Airbnb because I explained and showed them what happened with bad guests, and they immediately took action against them because the communities they're trying to create, not that they've created, but the one they're trying to create is a responsible host and responsible guest community, which they deal with any of the issues that arise between the two parties, not something that has been done before by other groups who are like, hey, we got our money, you deal with it.
Yeah, and there is a vetting process to join Airbnb. I mean, I guess you could go around the process. But then the other thing too that you brought up a little bit ago is that the person that's renting out their space can look through and deny a person. Of course, not in a discriminatory manner, but they can not accept the reservation if they does Airbnb have ratings system? They do, right?
They do, and it's actually something of contention with me as a host and people as guests, because while the guests can go and give you any review they want, depending on their personal opinion, which unfortunately is up to them and how they want to review stuff, with a host, you have to keep as immaculate and as perfect a place as you can. Anything below a perfect review, even a 4 out of 5 stars, is an immediate hit on your rankings, your listings, and your viewings. So they basically make that only the perfect scores really get up to the top. Everybody else is kind of just below the surface. And that's something that they've been trying to deal with, because personal opinion of someone who's staying at your place might be a 3-star, even though the next person believes that you're a 5-star. So that's something I think they're still dealing with. However, it does give at least some legitimacy to, is your place a decent place? Because those are always 4 or 5 stars. Is your place something that could be more to be desired, and the host himself or herself is someone who has a bad bedside manner? Those are usually the 1, 2, and 3 stars, which Airbnb has started to basically remove as they've gotten more conscious of kind of how these people impact their company. But I do believe Airbnb really needs to work on their PR. They've been blasted by the hotels. They've been blasted by local communities. And it's one of those things that's come in so quick and so fast, they haven't kept up, or the laws haven't kept up with their technology.
I agree that they have some serious PR problems, which I talked about earlier, and it's something really easy to fix, but they need to find a consulting company that can do it properly if they're going to outsource it. So is there anything you just wanted to say in closing before we sign off here?
The only thing I really just like to say, especially to the folks who are very anti-Airbnb, very anti-short-term, is that there are a number of us, and I would say even a broad majority of us, who are actually in this to try and stay with our family families and our homes, all of the places in which I actually rent out. One of them houses my sister and her fiance. One of them houses my mother. And even though part of those homes are listed on Airbnb, it is in the goal of making our lives easier and more affordable in the Bay Area, because things, as many of you know that are listening to this, is things have gotten out of control in terms of there's no housing, there's no place to live. So we've had to figure out creative ways to stay in the place that we were born in, the place that we love, the place that we don't want to leave. And this has been one of those kind of last things that we can think of, aside from obviously maybe selling it at the farmer's market or doing something else, that this allows us to take the few things we own and use them in order to continue to live in the place that we really love. And I know that can have two sides of the sword here or whatnot, but at the same time, it's allowed me and my family to stay around here because we work mostly in the hospitality field. As many of you may or may not know, hospitality is not the best paying, but at the same time, our skill set has lent us to doing this type of thing, and this has allowed all of my family to stay around here instead of having to move out of the area.
Yeah, we should have had you mention that at the beginning, that you actually work in hospitality, so that's why you see it from both sides of the coin there.
But our hotels are going against it very much because this is a threat to their income. In fact, after the Airbnb law was put in San Francisco, which banned non-homeowners from having short-term rentals, which reduced the Airbnb housing stock from 10,000 approximate units to 4,500. The hotels reported to me this year, as I am somebody who works within a number of different brands, that they've had the most profitable year in San Francisco on the history books, making billions of dollars where they had not made that before. So that is, while not 100% related, they're pushing on these very strict regulations on short-term rentals, and people like you and me who might have an extra space to rent, and basically saying that, no, you cannot rent it, only hotels can, and thank you for the extra money, because we've basically villainized you to the point of you cannot encroach upon our business. And that's where it gets a little bit complicated in terms of having a big company like a hotel telling homeowners that they cannot share their spaces with people because that's for hotels, motels only.
Well, and again, this is kind of where it's interesting that the advocacy piece from Airbnb dropped off, and that was a huge part of the PR. It seems to me like they just gave up. So I don't know if we have a little bit of time if you want to if you have any predictions about why that occurred, or if you know why that occurred.
I will try and not go too off the rails here, because I do have a very strong opinion about this and the fact that Airbnb, and who have come back to me and others and have asked how they can fix this, but basically they realized that they were outgunned. They went in guns blazing. They had everybody on their side, everybody from people like Scott Wiener in San Francisco and so forth, but they didn't realize that they were going up against both the people, the service workers and other people in San Francisco and elsewhere, and of course the people who are not homeowners and the people who are owning hotels. They have huge groups which basically can push through things like not allowing people to rent places except for long term. And while Airbnb got out the gun, let's say, ahead of the pack, the rest of the pack was much bigger than they were, and therefore when they caught up, they kind of crushed them down. Whether or not that's going to continue is anybody's guess. However, the fact that the hotels put a huge amount of pressure, and I will say that was also included in the people that were on the East Coast, a number of big hotel companies who I cannot mention are part of this. They were able to put pressure on San Francisco to cease the entire kind of more free-wielding Airbnb. So groups like me who had an extra room in my leased place were all of a sudden under a new law that said you cannot rent, and if we catch you renting, both you and Airbnb will be assessed a fine. The only way that you can rent is by either purchasing your place and living in it, or you cannot do it at all. So in San Francisco's case, they kind of cut the head off the dragon here, which was Airbnb, And I feel that that's given them the strength to go to other cities and kind of regulate on how they want short-term rentals to be, or if at all. And hotels, on the other hand, are starting to benefit immensely. In fact, I'm in South Lake Tahoe, where the Airbnb ban, funny enough, it's actually an Airbnb ban, even though there's many other companies in which participate in this, but it's called an Airbnb ban in South Lake Tahoe, and it actually passed by about 50 votes here in South Lake Tahoe. So once again, poor planning on Airbnb's part, they've lost at least a few thousand units in Lake Tahoe due to basically letting the hotels push them around.
Yeah, I agree with you that Airbnb didn't have the government relations or the experience to come in the way they did, and that's part of when their PR fails. So thank you very much for joining us, and I hope you have fun in South Lake Tahoe.
And let's hope for a great winter season. And while even though the ban went into effect, there are still great short-terms and long-term rentals all over the South Lake Tahoe area. The effect of the ban doesn't go in until 2020.
All righty. Thanks so much.
Have a good night, everybody. Thank you.
Okay, so my only last comment in my last 60 seconds is that please pay for your permits and pay for your fees if you live in Petaluma. The city needs this money, and we are lucky, as you just heard, that unlike San Francisco, we actually have procedures in place to do this. So please, 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 if you have a short-term rental, get your permits, pay your fees. It's just part of doing it. I know that there's a lot of reasons that people don't, but please do, and so we can keep these programs in place, and so that our city has the needed revenue in order to accommodate these tourists, to fix the parking issues, to deal with a lot of these issues. And yeah, I'm sure the permit fees are going to go up, but again, it goes with the territory. So thanks so much for watching. Again, you are listening to DG the 30-something on State of the Union on KPCA-LP, Petaluma, California, 103.3 FM. Good night.